Hi, I'm Marie. I'm a coordinator for Sunrise Somerville Youth, and we're having a short conversation with Charlotte Kelly, who is running for councilor-at-large in our 2021 municipal elections. We're going to be asking a few fundamental questions relating to Sunrise's mission, climate justice. You'll have 2 minutes per question except the intro. We will warn you visually and in the chat at 30 seconds remaining, and if you're speaking when time is up, a host will mute you. The questions will be in the categories energy, infrastructure, racial justice, and education. We would appreciate it if you didn't share the questions to keep things fair for all candidates. Then I'm going to turn my camera off to avoid being a distraction.
Hi, Charlotte. I'm Sam. I'm going to be proposing the questions to you today.
Awesome.
So if you want to begin with your pronouns, your past leadership and job experience, what you have done to address climate issues in the past, and then why you are running for office. That'd be great.
Yeah. Hey, everybody. My name is Charlotte. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a fourth generation resident. I'm a renter, and I've been a community organizer for the past 10 years now, mainly working on public education justice issues. But as we know, all of our justice issues intersect and are deeply connected with one another. So I was first politicized as a young person at UMass Amherst when I was a student, and I had to take out student loans in order to attend a public university. And my classmates agitated me around this inherent problem in our society that we have privatized public education and forced young people to take on the burden of student loans. And so they agitated me and helped develop me into an organizer. While I was at UMass, I helped fight for social justice issues on campus, joining anti-rape culture work, fighting for more funding for our public university systems. And most importantly, to me, one of the biggest victories when I was a student was helping run the fossil fuel divestment campaign that was started by Sunrise's co-founder, Varshini Prakash. And together we were able to organize at UMass and fight and make UMass the first public university system in the country to divest from fossil fuels. And subsequent public universities fell as a domino effect because of the win that we were able to secure at UMass. After college, I moved back to the area and helped get Senator Pat Jalen reelected as her 2016 field director. And then most recently, I was the executive director of a community labor coalition that brought together thousands of parents, teachers, and students from across the state to advocate at the State House and fight and win a $1.5 billion increase in public school funding, particularly going to low-income communities, communities of color, working class communities, immigrant communities, and communities with special education students. And then here in Somerville, I'm one of the co-founders of Defund SPD, which is working to move funds out of the police department and reinvest in long-term community care. So we address our issues and problems at their roots rather than criminalizing and policing our neighbors. And so when the at-large seats began to open up here in Somerville, folks that I've been organizing with on climate justice, on housing justice, on ed justice, on racial justice came to me and said, Charlotte, we want you to run. And I take the ask to my community really seriously. And so that's what brings me to the Sunrise Forum today. Environmental justice, climate justice is something that's been on my mind for as long as I've been politically conscious as a young person, whether it was fighting for fossil fuel divestment at UMass or thinking about how we make the tea free here in Somerville. As I said before, all of these issues are interconnected, and as long as we're rooting justice and equity and liberation at the center of them, our fights will win, and our fights will win big for working people. So thanks for having me today.
Wow, Charlotte, thank you so much for sharing all of that. That's really amazing. All right, we'll get into the first question, and this is on energy. How do you plan to transition Somerville to an all-electric, 100% renewable energy grid, and by what year will you do so?
Yeah, so as an organizer, I will admit, I'm really good at bringing working people together, building coalitions, and finding solutions with one another. One of the joys of running an Ed Justice Coalition was bringing people together who maybe didn't share the same ideas or share the same constituencies, but by struggling with one another and finding the best solutions, we were able to come to the best solutions at the end of the day. And so I'm really excited to work hand in hand with Sunrise and other folks in the environmental justice movement who know better than me, right? As an organizer, I have to admit when I'm not an expert. But from my understanding, being carbon neutral by 2035 is a setting that we and the kind of left movement have said this is where we need to be. We have to be moving aggressively towards this. Decarbonizing our city as best as we can, whether that's through our fleets at DPW or updating our buildings so that we're actually modernizing them so they're carbon neutral and energy efficient and working off of green energy. And so, Obviously, here in Somerville, there was a decision to rebuild the high school and not have it be carbon neutral. Through the COVID pandemic, we learned that our school buildings need massive amounts of updating to them. So buildings, the things that we have authority over, the city council, working to move those to be carbon neutral as quickly as possible. And using the funds at our disposal, whether that's through the American Relief Plan Act or through the Green Line Extension refunds, figuring out what resources we have at our disposal to move aggressively and quickly to carbon neutrality is really important if we're actually going to address the climate crisis in this, with the amount of urgency and seriousness that it requires.
Amazing. And Marie kindly reminded us in the chat that we have 2 minutes for questions. So thank you for rolling with that.
Yeah, of course.
Well, thank you for addressing our energy question. Our second question is on infrastructure. Many decisions about public transportation are made at the state level. How do you believe Somerville should engage with public transit? 2 minutes for that.
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously, many of us who ride the T have been experiencing fare hikes in the last several years, making it less and less affordable for working class people to ride the T, even if it is their sole means of transit. So, thinking about how we're creating the types of subsidies programs to ensure that all people can ride the T in Somerville is at the top of my priority list. The city of Somerville is going to be getting a massive refund from the Green Line extension because it came in under budget, which means that we're potentially getting anywhere between $20 and $30 million back from the state. To me, that money should be used for really two things: transit and housing. Housing, because we're seeing displacement happen in and around the Green Line extension, and working class communities of color that were set to benefit from the Green Line extension may not if they get pushed out. And obviously transit. The Green Line extension was there to make sure communities that experience environmental racism and inequitable access to public transit had access to it. So if we can use that $20 to $30 million to pilot fare-free buses primarily, but more importantly, free at point of access transit across the city of Somerville, I think that could push our neighbors in Boston and Cambridge to also work on pressuring the MBTA and pressuring the state to make transit free here in the city. As you said, the municipality doesn't control the routes that the T drives on, whether that's the trains or the buses, but there is a bus network redesign going on right now. And I think the council needs to play a really active role in making sure constituents are participating in that, pushing for not just more buses, but more frequency of buses. That's what I hear from folks over and over again, is the buses don't run frequently enough for them, and exploring micro transit routes so we can connect the north and the south part of our city that's right now really difficult to get across if you're a working person and you want to ride public transit. So, investing in making the T free, pressuring the MBTA and the state to invest more so we can expand routes and expand frequency, and exploring new municipal options are things that I'm really excited to do when it comes to public transit access.
Awesome. Thanks, Charlotte.
Yeah, of course.
And to follow up on that, yes or no, do you intend to make the T free for Somerville residents?
I'll do my damn best. So yes.
Thank you. Okay, moving right along. Our third category is on racial justice and social issues, excuse me. For 2 minutes, how do you view the future of policing in Somerville, and how have you engaged with the issue previously?
Yeah, it's a great question. So as I mentioned in my opening, I'm one of the co-founders of Defund SPD, which is currently a BIPOC-led organization fighting to not just move funds out of the police department, but reinvest in real public safety. To me, public safety is when somebody has a stable roof over their head, when they're fed in the morning, evening, and night, when they're able to get to a job where they feel safe and have dignity. And quite frankly, as a survivor, the carceral state and policing has not been a place of real healing from harm and violence that many of us experience as we move through the world. So, I'm really excited to get on the council and move funds into places that are going to deeply and materially impact people's lives, so that we're not experiencing violence on a day-to-day basis, and so that we're actually addressing our problems at their roots, rather than, as I said earlier, criminalizing and policing our neighbors for their needs and behaviors. So whether that's looking at services like BEST, which does emergency response, creating an unarmed emergency response team like the HEART program in Boston, or expanding the public health services that we offer to our neighbors, whether that's finishing a safe consumption site, or providing non-congregate shelter for our unhoused population in the city. There are so many more ways that we can be using those funds to address people's immediate material needs. And ultimately, at the end of the day, I am like walking in the footsteps and legacy of Black organizers from across the country who have fought to decarcerate our world and to fully imagine our humanity and our dignity. And so the work that I do on the council is in that legacy and in that path that Black and brown organizers, trans organizers, queer organizers have laid out for us. And it's our responsibility to take up that mantle and finish the job.
Thank you for addressing that difficult question.
Yeah, of course.
All right, for 2 minutes, how will you integrate new immigrants, particularly undocumented families, into the community and especially into Somerville schools?
That's a great question. One thing that's been really creative and exciting that I've seen in some other communities, I think Chicago and LA has this, is immigrant rights lawyers that are associated with the public school system to help folks navigate the complicated immigration system that we have. You know, I am a white person. My dad, however, is an immigrant, is a white immigrant and is not a citizen. And I think a lot of that has been the complications and difficulties of navigating the immigration system that is set up to fail people more often than it is set up to help people. So building those types of systems into the school system so that not just children, but families have access to the advocacy and the services that will help keep them safe here in the city. I know that Somerville is a sanctuary city, but ICE has still committed deportations in our city. So we actually have to make sure that our school sites are safe for not just students, but their families. We have to make sure that ICE is not coming into our schools, coming into our buildings, coming near our schools, coming near our buildings, because that ultimately makes our community less safe when they don't feel like they can be public and out in the open because of fear of deportation, detention, and deportation. So whether that's actually making sure that ICE is not coordinating with our schools, making sure that we're not passing information off to BRIC, which is, I think, the Boston Regional Intelligence Center, making sure we're not coordinating with folks who are collecting and facilitating the gang database, all of these really xenophobic, racist institutions that only harm our immigrant community. Those are the types of things that we can materially do in Somerville to make our community really welcoming for folks, regardless of their documentation status.
Thank you for addressing that. It's very complex as well. All right, and we're making our way to our last category, education.
Okay.
Yes or no, will you adapt the Somerville High School vocational program to include green job training, for example, solar panel installation, adapting buildings and infrastructure to be more sustainable, etc.? Go ahead.
It's a yes, no question. I think my short answer is yes. My long answer is obviously the city council does not have a ton of jurisdiction over the schools, and respecting our colleagues in the school committee is something really important to me, and making sure we have that democratic process. And also we do have authority over the budget and buildings, and so making sure that we're actually aggressively moving to keep our buildings green and providing the types of job training, resources, supports for students who may want to go into the green economy, either through vocational studies or in the high school as well.
Great, thank you. Thank you for elaborating. That was helpful.
Yeah, of course.
For 2 minutes, how can public schools prepare students for their future in a world impacted by climate change?
That's a fantastic question. And I wish I could ask it back to you because, as an organizer, working with young people was some of the most invigorating work that I did. Young folks are on the cutting edge of ideas and innovations and thinking big and bold about what's possible, and not just possible, but necessary for a world that is only going to be plagued by the climate catastrophe. So, first, I would say listening to young people and asking them what they want to see in order to prepare for the world, understanding what types of fears and anxieties that pop up for them as they move through life, whether with their peers or whether they're planning for their futures. And also thinking really critically about the resources and supports that we allow young people who decide to go out and do activism work and organizing work in their communities. How are we making sure that those experiences are validated and lifted up as just as legitimate as adults like myself who have full-time jobs? So I would start with that. And then, obviously figuring out where in the curriculum we can be supporting students and young folks and educators as they think about the climate crisis and how that can be integrated into our schools and our learning. Thinking about how that's going to actually impact people in our community, whether we're talking about climate refugees, whether we're talking about food insecurity, whether we're talking about unhoused folks and heat and cold that's happening right now. Thinking about how our school sites can be real community spaces for folks to get the kind of material support they need. And then most importantly, the social and emotional support that young folks need when they're in school. How are we making sure that there are mental health counselors, guidance counselors, and emotional support staff there and available for young people as they are dealing with the real anxiety and fear of the climate crisis that's coming? And that's here, quite frankly.
Those are all real and solid points. Thank you so much for sharing, Charlotte. And that is your last question. So thank you for taking the time to speak with us. This was very informative, and we'll definitely be in touch soon. And thank you for taking all of the very short bubbles of time to address those points. I know that they were difficult questions.
No, thank you so much for putting them together and doing this work in solidarity with all of you as you go through this endorsement process. Again, thanks for having me.